rebels in the world stand up.
Welcome to the Brave Podcast. I'm your host, Connie Jacob. Today, we are going to be going through a second session that we did, a masterclass. Now, this was created for schools, for administrators, for teachers. There was one participant today that put it best. She said, these concepts, of course, would work in school. This is a great way to adult human relationships. And she's right. So, as you're listening to these concepts, even though they are for a school culture, think about it for your home, think about it for your work, think about it wherever you have a relationship with someone else, because it is true. It applies across the board. Let's get into it. Who we created this building a culture of joy, connection, and responsibility for, of course, was schools. Schools that were noticing a dip in enthusiasm, learning's gone down, the attendance has gone down, school avoidance is up, connection between teachers and parents and admin is down. So people wanting to reignite a passion for learning again, for school spirit to come back, and to foster a culture where everyone is passionate and willing to contribute. Now, again, that's in a school context, but that's not to say that in a home, people wouldn't want to know how to do that as well, or a workplace. The question is always, what are you noticing in behaviors? I find that as adults, we're often reacting to the behaviors around us. Instead of really thinking about what we're noticing, we are expecting the worst. We are coming to school or to wherever we are, and we don't take time to really notice behavior. We react to behavior. And so by thinking about what are the behaviors that I'm noticing, what are the behaviors that I'm not liking? What is happening? And listing those out because oftentimes human behavior is pretty predictable. If you've been around a grade 5 student and you notice that every time that bell rings, they react, it's nothing new. You know that that's coming. And so by looking underneath behavior, we have to be able to not react, not go into our reaction mode and our triggers. We need to be able to look and think about what am I noticing about behaviors? But then even further, well, what do I want? What kind of behaviors do I want to see? Do I want to see more empathy? Do I want to see more collaboration, curiosity? Do I want to see more school spirit? I find that when I've asked educators this question, they stall. They don't know how to answer this question because we often are just putting out the fires. In order to create what we want in our classrooms, in our homes, wherever we are, we need to think about what do we want to create here? And that becomes a fabulous opportunity for us to think about that. What do I want to create? So, what do you want? What do you want your classroom to feel like relationally, emotionally? What do you want your environment to feel like? So, some of us might find ourselves in this cycle of punishment and fear and control, which leads to failure. A lot of people ask me, have kids really changed? Are they really different? I will say that 25 years ago, when I started working with youth in this whole area of resilience, there wasn't the same amount of anxiety that there is today. Things have changed. It is true. And I find that what worked 25 years ago doesn't work today. Fear, control, and punishment was the way I was raised in school. That's how we did relationships even. Punishment. You will be punished if you don't do things properly. And I had the fear of God for every teacher and my parents in me. And oftentimes it was all about control. I remember being at the park with my 2 boys when they were little, and they had done something that offended a parent, and she said to me, "Why don't you control your kids?" And this is something that we hear a lot, isn't it? Why don't you control your classroom? Why don't you control? And we even think it ourselves, why can't I get a little bit of control here? And yet, control is the problem because what it does is it fails every time. Fear, control, and punishment will fail every time. So, what's the alternative? Well, that's what we want to get into today in the recap. Now, what's interesting is I want you to think for a moment your partner using punishment as a way to relate to you, or fear or control. How's that going over? Or think about your best friend using fear or control or punishment as a way to deal with you when maybe something wrong has happened. Would you still be their friend, or would you be questioning whether they should be your friend or not? How many of you would not enjoy your intimate partner if that's the way things were? And yet we seem to think that this is how we should work with students. I remember, when my oldest was going through a really hard time, I remember these words coming out of my mouth. "I'm not trying to change your behavior." I was shocked at what came out of my mouth because that's all I wanted to do. I wanted to change his behavior. When I walk into a classroom where I've been having to teach a phys ed unit and the kids are not listening, I want to change their behavior. But what I found was interesting was this concept of, I'm not trying to change your behavior. I'm trying to connect with your heart. I'm trying to discover what's under your behavior. So you can't seem to sit and listen, or you seem to be agitated today and you're bugging the person next to you. I'm not trying to change that. I'm trying to connect with you as a person. Brene Brown has an amazing way of framing certain things that are hard to frame, like shame. We experience shame when we reach out to connection for someone who really they're meant to connect with us. Our teachers, the connection is meant to be there. Our parents, people, our spouses, we reach out for connection. And when we don't get it, shame enters our story. And she says in her book, Daring Greatly, that shame is the fear of disconnection. It's the fear that we've done or failed to do an ideal we've not lived up to, or a goal that we haven't accomplished. And this makes us unworthy of connection. Therefore, I must be unlovable and I don't belong. It's this intensely painful feeling, or this experience of believing that there must be something wrong with me and therefore I don't deserve love and belonging. That's shame. And shame shuts down learning, because what it does is it puts students in their amygdala. It puts them in their limbic system of their brain. They're not accessing their prefrontal cortex, where they're able to problem solve and reason and be curious, because shame is there, because disconnection is there. And so any educator who has said to me, connection just seems flaky. Connection seems that we're not still we don't have any control over our classrooms at all. Disconnection is actually causing more problems to be able to learn, more anxiety. Anxiety will increase, depression will increase, um, school avoidance will increase when disconnection is there. And what's driving all of those behaviors and those emotions? Well, it's shame. Behavior is communication. Behavior always has a story to it. You might have heard the phrase trauma informed. Being a trauma informed educator, well, you don't need to go get a ton of education in order to be trauma informed as a person. Now, if you want to take a trauma informed course, I would say go for it. It doesn't hurt to learn more and more things. What I'm hearing from teachers, though, is that I just need to know something very simple that I can keep in mind when I'm teaching. I don't have time for a whole new system. I just need something simple. So, can I give you trauma informed in one sentence? That is, what is your story from your perspective? When I come to another human being with that, I'm being trauma informed. Now, I might not know all the ins and outs that a psychologist does, but in my little scope of practice as an educator, that's all I really need to know. I need to know that when little Susie came in and was sharing with me that her cat wasn't cuddling with her that morning, and that's why she can't write the sentences that are on the board, and I freak out and go, just do your work, Susie. being trauma informed from her perspective, that was an experience that didn't allow her to move into a classroom setting right away. So now I can get what's under the behavior rather than trying to fix it. And so, behavior management, the way we have worked for years in all kinds of aspects of our life, whether that be education, whether that be work, whether that be the way we raise our kids, it's this idea of being punishment based. The focus is on upholding the rules. I don't care if you're sorry. What are we even talking about forgiveness for? No, like I just need you to do what I've asked you to do. I require you to submit. I want to stop this bad behavior. There's even a focus on good behavior and bad behavior. In my work in East Vancouver, where I started working with a lot of kids that were youth at risk, I've never met a bad kid in my life, but I've seen them make poor choices. But behavior management labels something or someone as bad. We want good behavior. We want compliance when there's behavior management as a focus. And that atmosphere, that culture will be powerless. It will be driven by fear. And the goal of every student or every person in that environment will be to preserve themselves. Where when we focus a little bit more on being educated about behavior, what's underneath behavior, it's still discipline based. In Dr. Dan Siegel's book, No Drama Discipline, he talks about how discipline means to teach, which I think is fantastic because teachers love to educate. And so discipline now becomes the way we teach. It's not punishing, but we're going to walk alongside, and there's a lesson here. We keep connection as our goal. We're repairing when there's ruptures. We're forgiving when it hurts. A lot of times behavior management doesn't address how hurtful it is when students lash out, post hateful things on social media, or get their parents to send us hateful emails. We don't realize that forgiving and releasing people actually is a way to educate ourselves about behavior. It still requires responsibility and self control. So a lot of people think that, oh, connection means we just let students do whatever they want, but that's not true. Connection is the base of trust that's being built that allows a student to now come to a place of responsibility. I'm not going to clean up your mess. You're going to clean up your mess. What's concerning to me personally is when I sat down with one of my friends who is a university professor. So this is now university. And she was getting reprimanded by her administration when she was requiring students to hand in assignments on time in order to get a good mark. She got a little slap on the hand by saying, no, 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 let them hand it in whenever. She would try to create responsibility, but then the administration would not allow her to do that. That is a big part of the problem, if you want my personal opinion, because until somebody takes responsibility for themselves, I will clean up my mess. If I don't hand in my assignment on time, I'm not getting a mark. These things allow students and people to know that I will be a powerful person who takes ownership and responsibility over my own life. Behavior education focuses on transforming a heart and a mind. We're not looking at outward behavior. We're not looking at outward behavior modification. We're looking at what's happening on the inside. We're creating that intrinsic motivation. And we know that good behavior comes from a base of connection, which builds trust, which creates powerful people who take ownership over their lives and keeps connection as the goal. The truth is that all of us have a goal, and that is to preserve ourselves. So whenever you interact with anyone, your goal, whether you acknowledge it or not, it's subconscious, is to preserve yourself. And so oftentimes the way that we will preserve ourselves is either through keeping the rules or keeping the peace, making sure everybody's okay, or defying the rules. And so the students in your class, they're doing one or the other. Some of them do both. Some of them lean heavily on one or the other. I know for myself, I was a rule keeper because I wanted the teacher to like me. I almost wanted the teacher to like me more than I wanted my peers to like me. So I was keeping the rules. The problem is that after years of people pleasing and keeping rules, I actually swung to the other side of the pendulum for a while where I didn't want to listen to anybody anymore. And so sometimes we might have a compliant child this year, but down the road, are we creating someone who's just going to swing to the other side? Some teachers have said to me, I have the best students. I don't know what's wrong with other teachers today. I have no problems with my students. My guess is that you have a class of rule keeping compliant students. Because as soon as you add a couple of defiant ones, I've had teachers who have been in that position. I don't know what's wrong with other teachers. I don't seem to have a problem at all. And then the next year, they get a room of kids who are oppositional or defiant. And now the tables have turned. And so to understand that every student is trying to preserve themselves, you're trying to preserve yourself, and we all have a pendulum on which we're at, helps us understand behavior, which can then lead us to either being too strict. If I had a classroom where most of them are oppositional, they're not going to listen, I might decide to get strict. I might lay down the law. Or I might become too soft when I realize, oh, these kids, they're having a hard time with me. I'm not reaching them. So I might swing to the other side and become too soft. And then when they start walking all over me again, well, that's it. I'm back to being super strict because you kids, you're taking me for granted. And so we keep shifting from one side to the other. We're not hitting the mark on the head. We're reacting to behavior rather than disciplining and becoming aware of behavior. And so, in this chart, if you're watching on YouTube, you can see it. If you're listening to the podcast, I'm going to do my very best to explain it. When you have a lot of rules, that strict environment, but you don't have relationship with those kids, eventually they are going to rebel. There is going to be opposition. And compliant children sometimes are the most dangerous ones, the ones that nod their heads on the outside, but on the inside, they feel disconnected. They feel they have to earn approval by performing. This is dangerous. For me, I would pick an oppositional child anytime because I know exactly what they're thinking. Whereas a compliant child, we don't know what they're thinking. So don't just think because someone is compliant, there isn't that opposition inside or that feeling of distraught, like I'll never be good enough. You could have no rules or low rules and low relationship. It's like, guys, do whatever you want. Doesn't matter to me. Well, what that creates is that creates a classroom of victims. Kids that are expecting, they become entitled, they want whatever they want. You might have a class with low rules and high relationship. That's the cool teacher. That's who we all want to be. But what that creates is a room of chaos. Oh, Mrs. Johnson, she's the best. But Mrs. Johnson doesn't have any grip on her class at all. They rule the roost. And students need a leader. What is ideal is when we have high rules, we high expectations of responsibility, personal ownership, but we also have high relationship. That is ideal. And when we have that, we have joy, we have connection, and we have responsibility. Last week on the podcast, talked about this triangulation, this cycle of irresponsibility. What happens when there's a bad guy? That person didn't do what I wanted them to do. And so therefore now I'm the victim. And then a rescuer enters the story and around we go. Those high rules and low relationship create bad guys because now I'm actually bringing out the worst in those students. When I have low rules and low relationship and they're ruling the roost, well, like we said, there's victims. When we have low rules and high relationship, oh, Mrs. Johnson, she's so cool, but we have chaos, we create a room of rescuers. But when we have expectations, there are rules, but there's also connection. We create powerful people who can make powerful choices for themselves. They manage themselves. To be powerful in this context does not mean being domineering. It doesn't mean being a high D on a disc profile. It means I'm a powerful person who manages myself and takes ownership over my own decisions. In order to do this, in order to create high rules and high relationship, I need to be committed to holding my end of the rope. What I mean by that is I hold my end of the rope and the holds their end, or my spouse holds their end, or my child holds their end. Now, what they do with their end of the rope, that's up to them. But I will keep holding the end of my rope. I am that half of the connection. And if they drop their rope and I drop my rope, there's no connection. I am the adult in the room. I need to model what it looks like to keep connection as the focus when all I want to do is throw in the towel. But at the same time, remember, your heart is important. Holding your end of the rope, no matter what the other person is doing with theirs, doesn't mean that you're being walked all over. It doesn't mean that you don't have boundaries. In fact, above all else, guard your heart because out of it comes well springs of life to other people. And if we let people wound our hearts and wreck our hearts, well, that's not being powerful, is it? If somebody is walking all over me, now as a powerful person, I can make a powerful decision of how I'm going to manage me in that situation. And I think it's important to remember that these students, they're going to mess up. We don't get what's called a fully developed prefrontal cortex. That's the front of your brain, those frontal lobes where we're reasonable, where we can connect, where we're creative, and where we problem solve, where we're curious. That doesn't get fully developed until we're age 25. That means we're in this for the long haul because some of us are dealing with 6-year-olds, 12-year-olds, 15-year-olds. They still got 10 years to go. And so remember, they're going to mess up. They're going to make mistakes. They're going to say things that are silly. But you know what? No matter what age we are, we all mess up. And so remembering that resilience doesn't come from how well and how perfect we do in our relationships. It comes from how we repair. In our masterclass, there was discussion around it's hard to unlearn the way we were raised. It's hard to do something different. And what does this even look like? Kobe, an educator from Australia, told some wonderful stories about being a home ec teacher and someone had spilled the flour and her instant reaction was to go in and rescue. I'll get it, I'll clean it up. But instead, remembering that behavior education focuses on you clean up your mess. I'm here as a support, but I'm not going to clean up your mess for you. Or if you have a student, maybe in an assembly, and they keep talking, instead of saying something like, that's it, you get a detention, that's enough. Again, that's that punishment paradigm. But instead, saying to them, would you like to stay here? And I'll give you another chance and you can listen. Or, and then you come up with what a natural consequence would be. What would you like to do? What's your choice? Give them the choice. When there's choice, there's freedom, and when there's freedom, there's connection, and it just keeps going around and around. If you didn't get a chance to watch last week's if you didn't get a chance to watch or listen to last week's podcast, I'll put that in the show notes. Check it out because it was about how do we become a powerful person ourselves so we can manage ourselves when those things happen because we're out of control. We can't control how that student is going to respond or what choice they're going to make. next week in the masterclass, we're actually giving away probably the most powerful tools. And so if you want to join us, I'm going to put that registration link in the show notes. Check it out because next week we're not only going to be giving you some one-liners that you can say that allow you to manage you, but also a model of communication that will keep connection central and allow for all of what we talked about today to be able to become a reality. But in the meantime, keep being brave to lean in to your relationships.
All the rebels in the world stand up.